I'm Nigel Vanderlinden. This is Collaboration is Culture podcast, exploring how we work together and how to make it better. In this episode, I'm joined by Susanne Madsen, an internationally recognized leadership coach and mentor for project and change managers. She has partnered and founded the Project Leadership Institute, which runs leadership programs to help project managers become better leaders in the workplace. Susanne is also an award-winning author of The Power of Project Leadership, which is now in its second edition, and has been described as a must-read for everyone in the project world. Susanne is known for developing leadership development programs globally and has worked with many high-profile companies such as JP Morgan, Citigroup, Philips, BAM, and NXP, just to name a few. In addition, Susanne is a popular keynote speaker on the topic of leadership, emotional intelligence, and stress. She is a fully qualified corporate and executive coach, an NLP practitioner, DISC accredited, and a regular contributor to the Association of Project Management. Susanne is the founder of Susanne Madsen International, a UK-based company. Susanne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you for having me.
Susanne, today we're exploring the topic of people focus in project management. What is people management and why have you observed it to be a problem?
Yeah, it actually goes back to, I think, my very first observations when I was a project manager years and years ago. And then I went, a bit of my own story perhaps. I used to be a project manager and I used to make all the mistakes that I write about today and teach on today. I was very task-oriented and wanted to get things done, a real type A personality. And then I went on a leadership program, like a 5-day proper leadership program. And it really opened my eyes. I was coached for the first time and I had two realizations. The first realization was, gosh, project managers need leadership. It's all about people. There's other elements too, like vision and, but it's a big element is people. And my second realization was the power of coaching. And that really set me off on a completely different trajectory of coaching and running leadership programs. So it goes back to that very initial observation about myself and about people I work with. And I very quickly or very early on saw that this is the difference that makes the real difference. Not just making the schedules and telling people what to do, but really connecting, really leading, because projects are about people. It's people who make projects work. It's not processes, it's people. So it's really one of the most fundamental things that we lead through others. If we lead through tasks, it's basically transactional. I expect you to deliver and develop or whatever, complete this task. It's a transaction. I give this to you, I want you to give it back and complete it. There's nothing transformational about it. There's no guarantee that the team member will even develop from that. So transformational change can happen on many levels, but certainly if we are people-oriented, we don't just talk about what task I want you to complete, but also what's in it for you? Why might you want to do that? What can you learn as a team member? So it's just a completely different focus.
I love it. And I specifically latched on to your statement or your comment, and forgive me, I'm paraphrasing, but people or the project is about people, or people deliver the project as opposed to task delivering the project. Is there something about project management or project managers, as the case may be, that may lead to someone who is more task oriented? Mm-hmm. Is there a natural predisposition to be task-oriented in project management? Is the training focus steering people to be more task-focused?
I would say yes and no, because it's actually not a challenge that's just there for project managers. So I would say yes, because many project managers, not everybody, but it certainly happens that many project managers have a technical background. And for those in particular, this is a challenge. Let's face it, not everybody has a challenge here. But in particular, and a lot of the leadership programs I run and the people I coach, they're often engineers. I know we have other people listening to this and engineers, but in particular, because we are task-oriented, there's a right or wrong way of doing things, and And technical project managers pride themselves of doing things right, and there's a solution. So I think it's in the nature. And no, I want to say no. So there's a yes and a no, because this is broader than project management. And this is another topic we can explore, which is what's happening at the moment. So organizations are cutting back on, there's fewer people doing the work. We are squeezing a lot down through the pipe, meaning that we start a lot of projects and we see which ones end up in the other end. Somehow we know that we can't deliver them all, but we just push and push and push. So the organizations are loading people with more and more projects, forcing us, in a sense, to become more task-oriented, because we have less time to have those in-depth conversations and to focus on the person in front of us. And that's not unique to project managers.
What is the consequence of that? What's the consequence of being overly focused on the task as opposed to the people?
I think there are so many consequences. There are consequences in terms of maybe my own health, because let's face it, I'm also a person. So if I'm very task-oriented, I might even ignore my own needs for rest and recovery. But of course, the consequences are that I may be running a team which is not a team. I think we use the word team very loosely. A collection of individuals working together is not necessarily a team. It's a group of people. And I have certainly witnessed many teams, let's call them pseudo teams, but we work together. We do have a common objective because we need to deliver the project, but we're actually not singing from the same hymn sheet. We actually don't work in a cohesive way. We may have conflict that we're not talking about. We're trying to pull in different directions. We're just not a homogeneous team. And that's one of the consequences of being very task-oriented. And I also want to add that this is not necessarily easy. Working with people is a skill that we can learn. Working with a team is much more challenging because you have the dynamic, you have the team dynamic going on. So I think the most immediate observation is that the teams become not well harmonized. Certainly not, you cannot have a high-performing team which is task-oriented only, because the pure definition of a high-performing team is one where we actually understand each other, we have vulnerability-based trust. There's a whole list of definitions of a high-performing team that involves the people aspect. And there are many other consequences. What does that mean? It means that we're not delivering the best projects. It means that we're not thinking in the best possible way because maybe we're not leveraging each other well enough. Yeah, lots of consequences.
And do you see these two, people focus and task focus, as being opposing forces? In other words, one is at the expense of the other?
Again, yes and no. They can be polar opposites, but of course we combine them and we have to combine them. So sometimes people misunderstand my message, because my message is not we must only be people-oriented. No, we have to plan. We have to be results-oriented. Of course we do. So the idea is that we must not forget about the people orientation, about the leadership. So actually, I'll tell you, when I started coaching and studying leadership, I thought, oh my God, I got it wrong. I've been, let's face it, I was working in technology, in investment banking, so there was a lot of pushing going on. There was a lot of assertiveness, a lot of getting things done. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe that's been my style all along. I was building self-awareness. And then I took the opposite approach. Then I became all about coaching and all about, how can you do this differently? All about empowering the individual, which is good, but I realized I'd gone too much in the opposite direction. We need a good balance of not just push and pull, but we need a good balance of focusing on results and focusing on the people. So the idea is not that we need to do one at the expense of the other. The idea is that we need to manage tasks and lead people. It's a philosophical statement, but that is the idea.
Perhaps two sides of the same coin.
Yes, and two very different approaches to getting results.
And is there something about now, right, this moment, and I'm specifically referring to this hybrid, remote, always-on world that we're now living in, that perhaps is either exacerbated the problem of task management or perhaps heightened the need and the importance of people management?
Yeah, it's interesting because on the one hand, as we mentioned just a moment ago, I see that there is more pressure. We need to do more with less. So in a sense, I think when people work remote, they do become more task-oriented, also in light of what's going on currently with so much more competition and organizations really having fewer people to do the same work. And on the other hand, we have people sitting at home. I think certainly in Europe, people are coming back to the offices. We still have people, however, who are feeling more cut off, who need somebody to reach out to them, also from a mental health point of view, and checking in. What's going on? We don't see each other in the office. So I think there is a need to be more proactive for remote teams and not just assuming that people are all right, because it's so easy to be transactional and task-oriented when we're all remote. So I think what I'm saying is we need to make an even bigger effort to reach out, and we can do it even if we're not seeing each other. There are ways, people say, how can I check in with people? I don't see them. Well, you can. It's different, but you can. You can have one-on-ones online, or you can, even in a team conversation, you can make sure that the first minutes are focused on some personal topics. So we probably need to force ourselves, but it is absolutely possible and is very necessary.
Well, that's a great segue into, how do we become more people-focused? And you just spoke to one-to-ones, and that's a great starting point. Who should I, as a project manager, be having one-to-ones with, and what should I cover in my one-to-ones?
Yeah, so many project managers push back on the one-on-ones because I don't really have time. And also, they don't report to me, so that's not my job, is it? And this is where we need to go back even a step further to, what's your attitude towards this? If we want to become more people-oriented or leadership-oriented, the first thought, the first important idea is that you've got to want to, you've got to have to see the value of it, because otherwise it becomes just another task. So that's point number one. Can each person, for instance, listening to this, and I think most of us can recognize that this is important, but still, is it important enough for you to prioritize it? If I can finally
recognize the value of it.
If I can finally say yes to that, then I can perhaps begin to schedule some one-on-ones. And I would say we need to be realistic. So don't just start scheduling out 5 one-on-ones each week and it takes up 5 hours, because then you're thinking after 2 weeks, I can't do this. So you abandon it again.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe take 1 or 2 or 3 people, the core people in your project, and maybe schedule half an hour every 2 weeks or at least every month, because you're not their line manager perhaps. So the idea is that you sit down and you talk about non-task related work. So it's more like how are things? What's going on for you at the moment? What is working well for you? Where do you need more support from me? Where do you need more challenge from me? So it becomes more about our relationship, our professional relationship, than it becomes just about the work we do.
I like that suggestion, and specifically your statement, non-task related conversation. I certainly know that in my own one-to-ones, I will often slip into, or I'm predisposed to, talking about task-related items because I have a action-oriented personality.
Yeah, and we do. Project managers are project managers because they have a drive to deliver things, and we don't want to take away from that. We just want to add some other ingredients to that dish, and those ingredients are a little bit more of a personal touch. And personal touch, I think, is important also to say it's not just about what did you do on the weekend. It's not that. It's really getting to understand what drives somebody, what is somebody interested in, what gets them up in the morning, what type of task would they like more of or less of, what ideas do they have for how the project or the project team could work better together. So it's all of those other more strategic aspects and understanding the depth of a person rather than just, oh, did you watch the rugby game? That's not necessarily where we want to go with this.
Now, I'm thinking about some of the comments you made earlier in this conversation pertaining to the pressure that is being placed upon project managers and project teams, i.e. get things done and get more things done and get more things done with less people. How, in that context, does a project manager create or make space to be relational, to have these one-to-ones, etc.? Well,
that's a really good question. And I don't just say that to win time here, but it is a really good question. It's one of the questions that I coach many of the project managers on one-on-ones, because that's true. Listen, I have meetings, I'm on conference calls all day, even I work overtime. How am I gonna free up time to do this? And there is only one answer. There's only one way, and that is delegation. And they don't like to hear it because I have no one to delegate to. And so we need to work through all of that. How are you spending your time? Do you need to be in all the detail? What's the value if you begin to slowly take a step back? How might it be a win-win situation because you're actually beginning to empower your team and at the same time you free up time for yourself? It's not a quick fix. It's not just a standard answer. It is each person working through what is essential. And you know what I say to people, I coached somebody yesterday exactly on this, and I said to him, if I give you 4 hours more a week, where are you going to spend them? Well, more detailed project meetings and going more into the details. That's the default. That's where we spend our time. But it's not the right answer. If I give you 4 more hours a week, I want you to spend them thinking differently, sharpening the saw, not just automatically going into the details. So we first have to address that need for us to want to do it all. I call it the superhero mentality. I want to do it all, I want to know it all, I want to fix it all. It's not right because you're not empowering the team in that way.
So in the same way that the project manager needs to be more relational with the project members, do they also have a role in, let's say, creating the conditions, as it were, for the project team to be relational with each other?
Yes, certainly to some extent. So one of my favorite activities that I encourage somebody to do on a team is a team charter. Not a project charter. So the project charter sets out what we're going to deliver, when we're going to deliver it, how we're going to do it, but a team charter. And a team charter is how are we going to work together. And we sit down and we talk about our strengths and our weaknesses. We talk about how we're going to make decisions. We talk about how we're going to celebrate successes. We talk about our purpose. So all of these fluffy things about behavior and perhaps even feelings, which is very uncomfortable for us because really, do we need to go there? And that is how a project manager can begin to create those conditions, because we're bringing those topics onto the table that will allow us to create the conditions. So, if I were to start a project today, I would have completely different conversations than I did when I ran projects 10, 15 years ago. I would dare to speak about that, which is difficult. What do you each expect from this project? How do you each want to develop your skills from this project? And I would ask everybody, think about a really good team experience you've had in the past, and think about a really bad team experience. Because everybody wants to have a good team experience, and then we share. What are your horror stories? And what are your good stories? And how can we learn from each of your stories? What kind of experience do we want to have on this team? Because we create it together. It's not for the project manager to come up with all these conditions, but it's to create the space. And also another thing I just want to say here is, for maybe some of the listeners or viewers who are familiar with Patrick Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, it's all about vulnerability-based trust. And there's also another study, I've written about this as well, a study from Google called the Aristotle Project, project I think it was, where they studied high-performing teams. And so many studies point to this fact that psychological safety is what helps drive team performance. How can we begin to build psychological safety in a team? Well, if the project manager goes first and shows, you know what, I've also made mistakes. You know what, I don't know all the answers. I need you, team members, to help come up with the great ideas. That's a great way that we can begin as project managers to create those conditions.
I love that. One of the things that I've seen you talk about, heard you've talk about, as it pertains to project management, and I would say being more people-focused, is managing stress levels. Managing stress levels both in terms of the PM managing their own stress level, but as well managing the stress level of the team. I think you called it the shadow side of project management. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on particularly stress in project management. And I know that you have a particularly personal angle as well that I'd love to hear.
Yes, it's such a big topic. I hardly know where to start. I'm actually writing another blog on it at the moment because we forget about it. And, I work with a big company at the moment and I coach many of their project managers. And I think at least 50% of them have issues with stress. Some of them have actually been through a period of burnout and they're coming back to the company. And it's just so sad because I see it and I hear the warning signs and I speak to people about it. And often what's at the root of the issues, so this twofold, right? There is not having enough people, wanting to do it on the cheap or as cheaply as possible, pushing down lots of projects, setting unrealistic deadlines. So that's what the organization needs to take responsibility for. But the expectations. Yeah, exactly. But the other side is, well, why, what is it that drives somebody to work hard, so hard that they neglect their own needs? And it's oftentimes lack of confidence. So I'm worried I'm not good enough, imposter syndrome. I want to do good. I need praise. I need to be validated. Fear that if I say no to this, if I say that it's too much, I'm going to be seen as not able, not capable, weak. I'm going to be made redundant. People catastrophize over this thing about setting personal boundaries. But for me, it wasn't even about that because I also had 2 elevated stress levels. I don't know that there was, if you run a big project, it's hard to say, no, you're in it, you're running it. But I actually went to my manager at some point and I said, what are the company policy for taking sabbatical? And I think they realized at that point that something wasn't quite right if I wanted to take 3 months off.
That was a flag.
It was. In fact, what happened was I went to HR in confidence, and the next day my manager came and spoke to me, and I was like, okay, for the confidence. Confidentiality.
Yeah, that wasn't a private conversation.
It wasn't. Probably that was for the better of it. But I ended up getting I took a sabbatical, but I also got a junior project manager to work with me. And that just made the whole difference because it was a massive project. And we had 50 people working on it, all technical guys. It was a $20 million project, so it was significant. And having this junior project manager work with me just, oh my God, it freed me up to focus on some of the more personal aspects of stakeholder leadership and so forth. But these are some of the dynamics that lead to stress. And I think as much as the organization needs to take responsibility, and they really do, each person needs to set their own boundaries. Everybody's got different boundaries. Some people really can deal with it. They're fine. They go and play golf on Sunday and the rest is fine, And others, they have a much lower tolerance. So it's about each person setting their own boundaries and being honest with that and recognizing the warning signs, because oftentimes what happens is that we dismiss it. Oh yeah, I get a cold often, but it's normal. Everybody else gets a cold too. Or I have a headache a lot, but it's probably fine because I take a headache pill, or whatever it is. Not dismissing the signs.
Are those boundaries something that should be discussed and even enshrined in the context of that team charter that you were referencing earlier?
That's a really good point. Because what is the culture? What is expected? If I receive an email, whether I'm a team member or the project manager, at 9 p.m., am I expected to answer? Am I expected to work weekends? I think it's very important to set down those ground rules. And I'm also not in favor of everything being too rigid, like, oh my God, it's 5 p.m., I must go home. I mean, that, we all know those people, right? It's like, oh, I can't wait. And they're out of there. It's just about having the conversation and having conversations about what I need versus what the project needs versus what the organization needs, and negotiating it, and not always being I lose or you lose. Like any relationship, there's things we don't want to do, and that's fine, but it shouldn't be regularly that we have to work late, and it becomes a bad habit that we work late and weekends to deliver a project. That's not okay.
I wonder, how can we operationalize, if you will, people focus, in the sense that it just becomes part of how projects and project teams are managed? Does it need to become a set of line items or activities within a project plan?
Well, we say practice. Practice makes perfect, right? So if you imagine that you learn to dance, first you go, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's if it's salsa anyway. And it becomes a little bit like, we look down, we're not really sure. And we're not really dancing, but we're trying. So with everything, it's about practicing. And with everything, it's not pretty at first because it's mechanical. If you learn to coach, it's like with a sheet of questions to ask. It's not pretty, it's not flowing, it's, but little by little we learn. And I think it's the same with people orientation. Maybe initially it's like, I have a post-it or something because I need to remember to ask more questions, or to, at the beginning of a team meeting, to do something, to ask people how they're feeling or whatever it is. So in the beginning it could be a bit mechanical, and as you say, we have to operationalize it or put some tasks down. So we make a task out of it, and little by little, hopefully it becomes part of our DNA.
For a listener, what can they start doing immediately to be people-focused? Yeah,
so let's acknowledge that some people may already be doing some of this. Okay, so one-on-ones, I think we mentioned. What are some of the people I need to have one-on-ones with? But also, am I being present? Am I listening to people? Am I giving people my full attention when I speak to them? One of the biggest gifts we can give someone is our attention and our time. So when you are with somebody, be there fully. Listen to them, not with a view to responding, but with a view to understanding what's going on for them. Ask more open questions. Ask questions where you're interested about them, not just the task they're doing. So it's the quality of the relationship also. And I would say to people listening or watching, just pick one person. Pick one person who you already have a reasonable relationship with, but you know you can deepen it and you want to deepen it. It would make sense for the project. Just pick one person. And think for yourself, how might I do this? Is it a one-on-one conversation, or is it an extension of a meeting we already have? How can I begin to maybe coach that person and ask more open questions? What is it I need to do? Maybe it's a stakeholder, maybe it's not a team member. That's a good place to start. Be really practical. And I've done some webinars before on emotional intelligence, and I would encourage people to study emotional intelligence, because this is really this is the foundation of being people-oriented. It's not cognitive intelligence, it's emotional intelligence. It's about listening, it's about empathizing with others, being able to walk in other people's shoes. That's part of it, not the full story. That has a lot to do with people-oriented. So it would be nice for everybody to have just one thing they want to do for themselves, like become a better listener or manage their emotions better. That's also part of it. If I always...
It starts with me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Susanne, how can the listeners stay connected with you after this recording?
I have a web presence, surprise, surprise, LinkedIn. So I don't know if my name is mentioned below this video, but I'm pretty much on my name, Susanne Madsen. It's on Twitter. It's LinkedIn, Susanne Madsen. I have a YouTube channel, Susanne Madsen. My website is susannemadsen.com or susannemadsen.co.uk. So it's pretty consistent. And then, of course, there is the book that you briefly mentioned before. But it did win the PMI's award, actually. So I'm not just encouraging people to read it because it's my book, but it hopefully will help people. The whole purpose of this book is to help people go from being a transactional, task-oriented manager to a people-oriented project leader. So it's right.
Well, I can certainly vouch for the book. Really, where this conversation started is I am a fan of the book. I have read the book, and I have also bought it for project team members in previous roles. So to me, it's a must-read for any project manager or any project management leader.
Very nice. Very good. Yeah.
Susanne, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I always learn so much, either from speaking to you, your recordings on the web, or your book. It was a real treat to get to interact with you face to face.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed the conversation too.